Deep beneath the jungles of Cambodia lies the remains of a civilization that once transformed an entire landscape. A civilization that built enormous temples, engineered vast reservoirs, controlled water across thousands of hectares, and created one of the greatest urban centers of the medieval world. At the heart of this civilization stood Angkor, and at its center stood a monument unlike almost anything ever built. Angkor Wat today, millions of people travel to Cambodia to see its towers rising above the jungle. But the ruins we see today are only fragments of a much larger world. Centuries ago, this landscape was filled with people. Farmers worked enormous rice fields. Craftsmen carved mountains of sandstone. Merchants traveled along roads and waterways. Soldiers guarded the kingdom. Kings commissioned temples that were designed to represent the universe itself. Angkor was not simply a temple. It was an enormous civilization. And then, slowly, it began to change. Political power shifted. Environmental pressures increased. Religious traditions evolved. The great urban landscape gradually declined, and the jungle began to reclaim parts of the city. So how did the Khmer build one of the greatest civilizations in Southeast Asia? And why did Angkor decline? This is the story of Angkor. To understand Angkor, we first have to travel back to a time before its famous temples existed. Mainland Southeast Asia was already home to complex societies connected by rivers, forests, agricultural lands, and trade routes. But life in this region was deeply influenced by one powerful force: the monsoon. For much of the year, rain could transform the landscape. Rivers rose. Fields became fertile, reservoirs filled. But during the dry season, the same landscape could become dramatically different. Water became precious for agricultural societies. Controlling this cycle was essential. The early Khmer developed increasingly sophisticated ways to manage water. They constructed reservoirs, they created canals, they redirected water toward agricultural areas. And these systems allowed communities to support larger populations. Over generations, political power became increasingly concentrated. Religious traditions developed alongside royal authority. Monumental architecture became a way for rulers to demonstrate their power and legitimacy. These developments created the foundations upon which Angkor would eventually rise. But Angkor was not created by a single king. It was the result of centuries of political expansion, engineering, agriculture, religion, and ambition. Slowly, the Khmer world was becoming something much larger, and eventually, a new capital would emerge from this landscape. By the 9th century, Khmer political power had become increasingly centralized. Royal centers expanded. Temples became larger. Agricultural systems became more sophisticated, and the landscape surrounding Angkor began to change. The Khmer rulers understood that a powerful empire required enormous amounts of food. Rice was the foundation of the economy, but producing enough rice for a growing population required water, and controlling water required engineering on an extraordinary scale. Massive reservoirs were constructed, canals connected different areas. Roads and causeways linked temples and settlements. Agricultural land stretched across the landscape. Angkor gradually became something far more complex than a royal capital. It became a vast urban and agricultural system. But there was another important element: religion. Khmer kings used monumental architecture to express their connection to the sacred. Temples were not simply buildings. They could represent sacred mountains. They could symbolize the cosmic order, and they could demonstrate the authority of the king. Each generation added new structures. Each ruler attempted to leave a mark on the landscape, and eventually one ruler would create the monument that would become the symbol of Angkor itself. In the early 12th century, King Suryavarman II commissioned an extraordinary temple. Its name was Angkor Wat. The scale of the project was enormous. Vast quantities of sandstone had to be extracted, transported, shaped, and assembled. Thousands of workers and craftsmen contributed to the construction. Engineers planned enormous walls and galleries. Sculptors carved thousands of details into the stone, and architects created a carefully organized sacred landscape. Angkor Wat was originally associated with the Hindu god Vishnu. Its central towers were designed to represent Mount Meru, the sacred cosmic mountain at the center of Hindu cosmology. The temple's enormous moat symbolically represented the cosmic ocean. The causeway created a dramatic journey toward the sacred center, and the galleries contained extraordinary bas reliefs, battles, kings, gods, mythological stories, processions. The stone itself became a record of Khmer civilization. But Angkor Wat was more than a religious monument. It was also a statement of royal power. It demonstrated that the king possessed the authority, resources, and organization required to transform an enormous landscape into a sacred monument. Imagine approaching Angkor Wat when it was newly completed. The sandstone would have been far less weathered than it is today. The towers would have risen above a living city. Pilgrims would have crossed the causeway. Priests would have performed rituals. Royal ceremonies would have filled the complex. There would have been movement everywhere. Angkor Wat was not a ruin. It was alive. It was one of the greatest religious and political centers of its time. But temples were only one part of Angkor. The real city was much larger. Thousands upon thousands of people lived across the wider urban landscape. Farmers cultivated rice. Craftsmen worked stone, metal, wood, and ceramics. Merchants moved goods between communities. Religious specialists served temples. Soldiers protected the kingdom. Administrators organized resources. And the surrounding agricultural landscape supplied the food that supported the entire system. One of the most important discoveries of modern archaeology is that Angkor was not a compact city in the way we might imagine a modern capital. Instead, it was a vast network. Roads connected different areas. Canals moved water. Reservoirs stored enormous quantities of it. Agricultural fields surrounded settlements. Temples and royal compounds formed major centers within this landscape. Much of the population probably lived in structures made largely from wood and other organic materials. These buildings did not survive for centuries. Stone temples did. And that creates an illusion. When we look at Angkor today, we see the monuments. But the people who built and maintained those monuments lived throughout the landscape. Their homes, farms, workshops, markets, and daily lives formed the living heart of Angkor. The temples were the most visible part. The people were the civilization. By the late 12th century, Angkor entered another extraordinary period. One of its most influential rulers was Jayavarman VII. His reign followed periods of conflict and political instability. But instead of allowing the capital to fade, he transformed it. New temples were constructed. Roads and bridges connected distant regions. Infrastructure expanded. And the religious landscape changed. One of the most extraordinary monuments associated with Jayavarman VII was Bayon. Unlike the symmetrical towers of Angkor Wat, Bayon is famous for something far more mysterious: giant stone faces. They rise from the temple towers. Calm expressions stare in different directions. Their precise meaning remains a subject of scholarly discussion. Some interpretations connect them to Buddhist imagery. Others have associated them with the king himself. Whatever their exact meaning, the faces communicate something powerful. They make the ancient city feel watched, as if the rulers and beliefs of Angkor are still looking back at us through the stone. Jayavarman VII also invested heavily in infrastructure: roads, bridges, temples, reservoirs, and institutions associated with public welfare. His reign demonstrated the enormous organizational capacity of the Khmer state, but it also revealed a growing complexity. Angkor was changing politically, it was changing religiously, and eventually it would face environmental challenges that would test the systems on which its power depended. To understand the rise of Angkor, we have to understand water. And to understand its decline, we may have to understand it again. The Khmer created one of the most remarkable water management landscapes of the ancient world. Reservoirs stored water, canals transported it. Embankments controlled it. Agricultural fields depended upon it. This system allowed Angkor to support a huge population across a landscape where rainfall could be highly seasonal. But hydraulic systems are powerful only when they remain stable. When rainfall behaves predictably, reservoirs and canals can provide enormous advantages. But when climate patterns become extreme, the same infrastructure can become vulnerable. Too little rain creates drought. Too much rain can overwhelm canals and damage embankments. And repeated cycles of extreme weather can weaken infrastructure over time. Archaeological and environmental evidence suggests that Angkor experienced periods of climatic stress. Long droughts were followed by intense monsoon events. Such instability may have placed enormous pressure on the hydraulic network.
We must secure the river.
But climate alone cannot explain everything.
From the eastern province.
Angkor was also experiencing political, economic, and religious changes.
Our forces will advance.
The city's story was becoming increasingly complicated.
This is where we will make our stand.
And eventually, those changes would contribute to its transformation.
Our forces will advance from the eastern province. This is where
so why did Angkor decline? For centuries, the answer was imagined as a dramatic catastrophe. An invading army, a city abandoned overnight. A civilization swallowed by the jungle. But archaeology tells a different story. Angkor did not simply disappear. Its decline appears to have been gradual. Political power shifted. Economic networks changed. Regional competition increased. Religious traditions transformed. And environmental pressures affected the systems that supported the population. The rise of maritime trade may also have changed the economic importance of inland capitals. At the same time, Theravada Buddhism became increasingly influential. Unlike the monumental temple-centered systems associated with earlier royal traditions, the new religious landscape operated differently. Angkor was adapting, but adaptation takes time. And when multiple pressures occur together, even powerful civilizations can change dramatically. People did not simply vanish, they moved. Communities changed. Political centers shifted. Some temples continued to be used. Others gradually became less important. The city that had once dominated the region was no longer the unquestioned center of Khmer power. And over generations, parts of its enormous urban landscape became quieter. Vegetation returned. Buildings made from wood disappeared. Roads deteriorated, canals filled with sediment, and the monuments that remained began to stand increasingly isolated within the landscape. This is one of the most important lessons of Angkor. Great civilizations rarely collapse for a single reason. They transform through a combination of political, economic, environmental, and cultural forces. As the political center of the Khmer world shifted, Angkor entered a new chapter. The temples did not completely disappear. Religious activity continued in parts of the landscape, but much of the enormous urban system was gradually obscured. Vegetation covered roads. Forest grew around temples. Sediment accumulated in waterways, and the full scale of the ancient city became difficult to see. Centuries later, explorers and scholars began documenting Angkor more systematically. But modern archaeology would reveal something even more extraordinary. Using aerial photography, satellite imagery, and eventually LIDAR technology, researchers were able to see through the dense vegetation. What appeared to be jungle was actually hiding an enormous human landscape. Roads, canals, reservoirs, settlements, agricultural systems. The discoveries changed our understanding of Angkor. The temples were not isolated monuments. They were pieces of a vast earth. Today, Angkor stands as one of the greatest archaeological landscapes on Earth. Millions of people visit its temples every year. They photograph the towers of Angkor Wat. They walk beneath the mysterious faces of Bayon. They stand among the roots and stones of ancient monuments. But the true story of Angkor is much greater than the ruins. It is the story of people who learned to transform water into power, people who built cities across an enormous landscape, people who created monuments capable of surviving for centuries, and people who experienced the same challenges that have confronted civilizations throughout history. Climate, politics, economics, religion, resources. Change Angkor did not simply vanish, its civilization transformed. Its people adapted, its political center shifted. Its religious traditions evolved, but its legacy survived. Every stone still carries evidence of the civilization that created it. Every reservoir tells us something about its engineers. Every carving preserves a fragment of its beliefs. And every temple reminds us of the extraordinary ambition of the Khmer. Angkor was never simply a lost city. It was an entire civilization hidden within a landscape. And centuries later, the jungle may have covered its roads, but it could not erase its history. This is Angkor. This is ReHistoryy. History leaves clues. We follow them,